Okay, so as I mentioned, for our continuation of the study of Psalms, I thought we would look at what's known as some of the Psalms of imprecation. And I'm not sure that there is even a Hebrew term for them. Imprecation is Latin for imprecare, which means to call down a curse on somebody. So these are basically Psalms, really very kind of angry Psalms that ask God to curse people who have done bad things. And one of the first things that I noticed as I was looking over this material is, look, I mean, a lot of Psalms appear in their entirety in the Siddur, right? I mean, we just spent a few weeks looking at the Shir Shalom, the Psalm for the day. And then there are all the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, right? Kabbalat Shabbat is Psalms. Hallel is Psalms. They are all Psalms that are contained in their entirety. As you look at these Psalms, I'm not familiar with any of them that appear like in their entirety in the Siddur. I could be wrong. It could be, Psalms for kind of like rare occasions, but there are like lines or chunks or a couple of, like selections of some of these Psalms that appear in the Siddur, but not the entire Psalm. And what I think I'd like to do is, rather than sort of give any introduction more than what I've just said, look at, let's say, one Psalm first, and ask ourselves some questions, right? Like, what are these Psalms trying to accomplish? What are they doing in the Bible? Why are they not in the Siddur? What is their meaning? What do we make of them? Et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to sort of like, prejudge what your reactions will be before we look at least one of them. So I'm gonna do what I did is the four that I sent you an email the other day with the four that I've selected for us to look at. I'm under no illusion that we will get through all four of them tonight. I'm under no illusion that we will necessarily even get through one of them tonight. But I copied and pasted them so we can all be looking at them together. If you have a Bible in front of you and you want to open it to that, that's great. But you don't have to. Okay, so here is Psalm 109. All right. Laminatzach LeDavid Mizmor, for the leader, a psalm of David. O God of my praise, do not keep aloof. For the wicked and the deceitful open their mouth against me. They speak to me, really, they should be speak of me with lying tongue. They encircle me with words of hate. They attack me without cause. They answer my love with accusation, and I must stand judgment. They repay me with evil for good, with hatred for my love. Okay, I want to stop here for a moment because you'll see when we get to the next verse, it really makes a kind of a transition. So here, David or whoever the author is, whether it's actually David, is right making certain claims, right, that he is being persecuted for no reason and he's totally blameless, right? I mean, he acts with love towards these other people, but they act wickedly towards him. They speak evil, they plot against him, you know, sounds very paranoid. Although you can be paranoid. I mean, being paranoid is no guarantee that people are not, in fact, out to get you, right? Um, but he's acting really, you know, he feels that he is being unjustly accused and unjustly persecuted, right? So, um, you know, any thoughts or comments on the verses that we've just read? I'm not assuming that there will be, but I want to, at least give an opportunity if there are.
Rabbi, I do. First
Yes.
off, it says it's by David, so that took care of one question because first I thought it was Carolyn Levitt who was putting that out.
Right.
But the point really is that it depends. We don't know the truth of this. We just know that these are the bald allegations of someone. They
Right.
could be 100% true. They could be completely false. But it makes you realize how important it is to have some underlying facts and not just this oh woe is me stuff.
Right. And it's, there are no specifics, right? There are no specifics. The author doesn't say who these evil people are, doesn't say what their motivation is, in fact, doesn't even speculate as to what their motivation is. We don't know what he's accused of. We know nothing, right? And I mean, which is one of the reasons why, um, look, you, right, all right. So traditionally, if it says that this is a Psalm of David, the tradition says that this is David, right? Um, Now, there are a few of the Psalms of Asaph, okay? And one of them, and I don't even remember whether it's one that I gave for us to look at in this sort of section or not. But he is talking about Gentiles having, you know, being having having destroyed and overridden the temple and so on and so forth, right? So I looked up who is this guy Asaph, um, and he was one of the chief Kohanim during the reign of David. Okay, if he was one of the chief Kohanim during the reign of David, that creates a difficulty for assuming that he is actually the author of the psalm attributed to him, right? Because he's bemoaning the fact that Gentiles have destroyed and taken over the temple, which is highly unlikely to have happened during Asaph's lifetime, because the temple hadn't even been built, right? Let alone destroyed and conquered, right? So, and frankly, I don't know how the tradition resolves that. I mean, clearly the tradition knows that the temple was built not by David, but by Solomon, right? And that the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians hundreds of years later. Um, I suspect that the tradition might say, well, Asaph had the gift of prophecy, and he was bewailing something that had not yet happened, but that he knew would. Okay, which is not, not crazy. I mean, certainly under the assumptions that, the tradition operates under, right? So, but I would not necessarily assume that David is actually the author. And I do think you're correct that, it would be helpful in either establishing or, for that matter, refuting the Davidic authorship of this psalm if we had some details as to what exactly he was accused of, his maybe speculation as to why, etc. But we have none of that. Okay, so go on, because you're going to see it switches gears here. And even like from the plural to the singular, right? It's because up until then it's talking about they, them, and now it's talking about him, right? Appoint a wicked man over him. May an accuser stand at his right side. Okay. And the Hebrew for accuser is Satan. Okay. I'll highlight that. Right. Satan, in English, Satan. Okay. And Satan is in the Hebrew scriptures, but it's not, a guy with horns and a pitchfork and red skin. It simply means the accuser. Okay. So, David or whoever wants this person, not people, person who's been doing all of these nasty things to him to be brought to judgment with an accuser standing at his right side. May he be tried and convicted. May he be judged and found guilty. May his days be few. May another take over his position. May his children be orphans, his wife a widow. Okay, I'm gonna stop here and say that I have a high school classmate, actually friend. I mean, he's a good guy, who is now a non-denominational evangelical minister and a good guy, but got caught up in all of these culture war stuff. And we were having a discussion over Facebook, and he said, well, we are commanded to pray for our leaders. And I said, I pray for the president every night. Oh, you do? Good. I said, yes. Psalm 109. Right? Right? Go back to it, right? May he be tried and convicted. May he be judged and found guilty. May his days be few. May another take over his position. May his children be orphans, his wife a widow. Right? I mean, if you right? I don't have to go there, but it works, right? May his children wander from their hovels begging in search of bread. May his creditors seize all his possessions. May strangers plunder his wealth. May no one show him mercy. May none pity his orphans. May his posterity be cut off. May their names be blotted out in the next generation. May God be ever mindful of his father's iniquity, and may the sin of his mother not be blotted out. May the Lord be aware of them always and cause their names to be cut off from the earth. Because he was not minded to act kindly and hounded to death the poor and needy man, one crushed in spirit. He loved to curse. May a curse come upon him. He would not bless. May blessing be far from him. May he be clothed in a curse like a garment. May it enter his body like water, his bones like oil. Let it be like the cloak he wraps around him, like the belt he always wears. May the Lord thus repay my accusers, all those who speak evil against me. Okay, so I'm going to pause here again because, right, it's shifting once again, person, right? It's talking about them, and then it's talking about him, and then it's talking about them again. Okay, now why again? I don't know. I mean, it could be that these were originally different poems that were cobbled together as one, right? But you know, there is a certain kind of like measure for measure in this poem, right? I mean, as he did to others, may what he did to others be done to him, right? He loved to curse people, may he be cursed. He refused to bless people, may he not be blessed, right? May he did not do justice for the poor and the needy, may there be no justice for him, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, Leslie.
Rabbi, is there anywhere in the Hebrew scriptures or writings of any kind that where someone asked God to curse someone and God did curse them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are. I mean, I'm
in other words, this could work. I mean, it's not just wishful thinking. I mean, God actually has listened to someone and cursed someone else because someone asked him to.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but it has to be like justified, right? I mean, it's not magic. It's not magic. It's not necromancy. It's none of those things, right? It's like, so, you know, because there is that same measure for measure even in this psalm, right? In other words, if you ask God to curse somebody, right, and that person is not deserving of being cursed, then they won't be cursed. And in fact, that would come back on you as well, right? So it's not, I mean, that's the difference between, I think, and that's what makes it really a prayer for justice.
Well,
right?
tell me an example of when someone asked God to curse someone else and God did curse that person.
Well, again, I couldn't point out like individuals, but certainly other nations, right?
Oh,
I
I
mean,
see.
when Israel was fighting against their enemies, right? And I mean, look, if you look at the Exodus, right, that's a measure for measure, right? And
Mhm.
it no, I mean, it is. I mean, look at, the first several plagues, right? I mean, the blood when the Nile became blood,
Yeah, but
right?
that's different because God wanted to curse Pharaoh. He didn't, it wasn't a suggestion from somebody and he did it.
That's true.
Right.
It's not
Okay.
in
So,
his heart.
no, so fair enough. But then that's the question. In other words, is this simply a response to prayer? I mean, like I say, it has to be justified. The prayer has to be justified. It's not magic, right? It's not like, you know, I don't like you. I'm going to pray for you to be cursed, and therefore God is going to curse you, right? I mean, you did something to me, and I'm going to ask God to curse you. And God is going to say, yeah, that's actually deserved or not deserved. Um, and look, I mean, commentators have had difficulty with the question of why God waited so long for the Exodus, right? But so would God, right? In other words, does the cursing or does the prayer, does it activate something that's already there in potential and just waits to be activated? Or, would it have happened anyway because it was what was deserved, regardless of the person like asking God to do it? Okay. D, you had your hand up and down and up and down. So you have.
Well, I thought it was going to be covered. I just want to flip it. When you talk about something that can't just be spewed out, it has to have something that's substantiated. The reverse of that proves those words true. Who was it that wanted to save people in Sodom and Gomorrah or Lot? I forget the story. And God kept saying, show me X number of people that support why you want them saved. And ultimately, it couldn't be done. And so the rest is history. But the opposite of that, to justify evidence instead of just spewing out slanderous remarks, proves that point. But the
Yeah.
but the point that you're talking about, I wonder if there is an example of somebody asking somebody else to be cursed. Was that possible with, what was his name, Dathan, after everything that he had done against the Jews? And then I get my characters mixed up. Who went forth to show what he had done to the people to deserve that he be slaughtered? Would that be a case?
Well, look, I mean, I don't know, if you're thinking, I mean, look, there were plenty of cases. I mean, Korach, for example,
Right.
right? But other times that people rebelled against Moses, right? And Moses says, I didn't do it, right? Whatever it is they're accusing me, I didn't do, right? Um, and um, or like if you think, I mean, talk about David, right? I mean, the whole story of David and Bathsheba, right? And he, right? So Bathsheba is married to Uriah, who's one of David's officers, right? And he's off in battle, and David impregnates Bathsheba, right? And then he's like, this is bad. I'm going to get in trouble, right? So he has, right? He brings Uriah back from the battle, right? On like a little like R&R. And David's like, oh, go into your wife. How could I do that when my men are suffering out in the field? Right? I mean, David's hope was that, they would be together and that nobody, right? I mean, like they might do the math and say, oh, but, they had premature births back then too, right? But because he wouldn't go, right? So that's when David had him killed, right? He sends a note with Uriah to Uriah's commander, who tells Uriah, right, set him up in a vulnerable position and then withdraw and leave him stuck, right, to be killed. And that's what happens, right? But then and David, does he get away with it? Kind of, right? He's right. Nathan knows what happens, and Nathan confronts him, and David admits his sin, right? And the baby born of that union dies, right? But then, subsequent baby born of that same is Solomon, who becomes the king, right? So it's, look, I once heard a sermon. It was on Shabbat Shuvah, right? The Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I went to hear the then chief rabbi, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef. And he said, the greatness of David was, yes, he was a sinner, okay? And when he sinned, he wasn't fooling around, right? He sinned big. But when he repented big as well, right? So that's something, right? Whereas, the adversary that David is talking about right, doesn't even repent, won't acknowledge, right? And that, right? There are people who do bad stuff and they get called and they acknowledge it. And then there are people who do bad stuff and they never acknowledge it, right? So I don't know. Anybody else? Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the psalmist is calling for appointment of a wicked person, as opposed to someone who's a just person. Because if the goal is to deliver justice, I would think you'd want a just person to deliver it. If not, it could be construed as vengeance.
Well, it is
Vengeance.
vengeance.
When
But it's always, as I pointed out in the email that I sent to you, right? Right. There's that phrase, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, right? Which people totally misunderstand. They're like, I'm going to go out and get revenge because vengeance is mine, says the Lord. No, you can't go out and get revenge.
Only I can.
Right? Only God can. What you can do, which is what these Psalms do, they ask God to act, right? But what is the difference between prayer and magic, right? We ask God to act, right? And God either acts because our request is justified, or he declines to act because our request is not justified, right? And that's the difference between, and that's, I think, one of the things that biblical religion introduced is that rituals are not theurgistic, right? In other words, right, if you have a sort of pagan or theurgistic situation, if I do the rain dance properly, God must make it rain, right? Whereas, we pray for rain and God delivers the rain or God doesn't deliver the rain, right? According to the Shema, based on our behavior, right? But it's not magic, it's not theurgistic, right? So we can ask God to do these things and God either will or won't based on, so I really don't have any problem with this stuff, right? Because even if, look, I could acknowledge that it is problematic that I say these verses of page 109 and apply them to the resident of what is left of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, right? But ultimately, I'm just asking God to do these things, right? I'm right. I'm not. No, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm going to do it. I'm not saying any of you should do it. I'm asking God to do it, right? And God either will or won't, right? And so far, for unfathomable reasons, God has declined so far. But
it's still through the appointment of a wicked person. That's what.
What?
It's still through appointment of a wicked person to carry this out. That's what it says.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, but you don't know, maybe God was going to do it regardless of whether you or anyone else prayed for it.
Sure.
So, right. So there's no reason to think it's cause and effect, is what I'm saying.
Right. But Joe, to your point of a wicked person, right? I mean, if you look at the destruction of the temples, right? I mean, it's very clear that the normative Jewish teaching is that the temples were destroyed because of our sins.
Right.
Right. It is also normative Jewish teaching that the Babylonians and the Romans were evil.
Right.
Right. God can use evil people as his instrument.
Right.
It's not problematic at all. I mean, what is perhaps problematic is for God to use somebody as his instrument and then punish them for what they did, right? Which God also seems to do in the Bible, right? But the fact in quotation marks that God uses wicked people as his instrument, not seen as problematic in the least, right? Right. Anybody else? All right.
I'm starting to have real trouble with why this is really in here as a psalm. And we haven't heard all of it, and he may make a comeback. But this is vengeance. This is immature as it can possibly be, based on what we've read. I mean, we may be talking about Hitler now, but even if we're talking about Hitler, you don't put the sins on the children, and that's what David is saying, or whoever said this, and you don't. And we have instances in the Bible, in the Torah, where you're supposed to just wipe out a whole group. You kill everybody. You sow salt into the land. Basically, that's the religion of Genghis Khan, as I remember. But that's exactly what it is. That's not where I believe we are or where we should be today.
Correct, but we are not biblical Judaism. We're rabbinic Judaism,
Right.
right? But I think it's an important point, right? I mean, like if you look at look, there are a number of instances when a biblical verse gets into the liturgy and it is either changed or truncated. Okay, like when we take the Torah scroll out of the ark on holidays, right? We think Adonai, Adonai, Arahu, right? The verse as sung says God forgives iniquity. The verse as it appears in the Bible says God does not forgive iniquity until the fourth generation. Okay, the verse in the Siddur that talks about God as Oseh Shalom Uvoreat Hakol, right? The creator, right? The one who makes peace and creates everything. In Isaiah, it says Oseh Shalom Uvorei Ra, who makes good and creates evil. Okay, which actually is probably a statement against Zoroastrianism, right? Which posits, right? There's the God who creates good and the God who creates evil, right? Two, right? But right, the Bible doesn't want to say that, right? I mean, that's gets us back to Satan, right? The sort of evangelical idea of Satan as like this other God, right? But it doesn't sound good in the liturgy, so we don't say it, right? So, but or the commandment to wipe out the Amalekites, right? Which no longer applies, right? And now, we might be happier if the reason that it no longer applies is because the Sanhedrin got together and said, we don't like this. Okay, this is not good. It's not nice. All right. No, I mean, but why doesn't it apply? It doesn't apply because the halakha says there are no Amalekites anymore, right? That when the northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians, and this we know, I mean, the Assyrians did move conquered populations around so that they would intermarry and lose their identity, right? So therefore, there aren't any Amalekites. If there were Amalekites, we'd have to kill them. But there aren't, so we don't, right? I mean, it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't, I mean, many things that appear morally problematic that the rabbis have gotten rid of. Okay, so yeah, you're right. I mean, this, and maybe that's why it's not in the liturgy, right? That because the liturgy is put together by the rabbis, right? It didn't fall, from heaven, and maybe the rabbis look, we don't really want our people praying this, possibly. All right, move on. I was right. We're not going to do all four Psalms. All right, so we have another. Right. All right. So may the Lord thus repay my accusers, all those who speak evil against me. Right. So now we're again in the plural. Now you, O God, my Lord, act on my behalf as befits your name. Good and faithful as you are, save me. for I am poor and needy, and my heart is pierced within me. I fade away like a lengthening shadow. I am shaken off like locust. My knees give way from fasting. My flesh is lean, has lost its fat. I am the object of their scorn. When they see me, they shake their head. Help me, O Lord my God. Save me in accord with your faithfulness, that men may know that it is your hand, that you, O Lord, have done it. Right? I mean, like I said, it's God who does it and either chooses or not choose. Let them curse, but you bless. Let them rise up, but come to grief while your servant rejoices. My accusers shall be clothed in shame, wrapped in their disgrace as in a robe. My mouth shall sing much praise to the Lord. I will acclaim him in the midst of a throng, because he stands at the right hand of the needy to save him from those who would condemn him.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
there's a line in there about, I can't quote it, but something like, so they may know that you, this being
Right.
the person complaining, God is the you. Isn't that exactly what Moses said when he was directing Aaron to do one of the plagues, so that they will know that this is God's work as opposed to magic or something like that?
Right, exactly. Right. I mean, it's right. I mean, that's the whole point of the plagues, right? Is that Pharaoh is believed by the Egyptians to be a god,
Right.
and apparently believes himself to be a god. Right. And we certainly inscriptions from ancient Egypt of, different pharaohs where they claim that they are gods, right? They claim that they are, they are the creator of the sun and the moon, right? Or in one of the Haftarot that we read, Pharaoh is personified as a Nile crocodile. Right? It's a giant crocodile crouched in the Nile, right? And it says, and here, like, there are two different ways to translate it, and both would be accurate, right? Li, so the Hebrew phrase is Li Yori Va'ani Asitini, okay? Which could either mean my Nile is mine, I have created it, or my Nile is mine, I have created myself, right? Which would be like, right. But even if you translated it, right, my Nile is mine and I created it, right? So Pharaoh is still claiming godlike powers, right? But if Pharaoh is claiming to have created not only the Nile, but I created myself, right? All the more so, right? Is claiming godlike powers, right? So the whole idea of the plagues, it's not simply to convince Pharaoh it's to humiliate Pharaoh, right? It is to show
that he's not a god,
the Egyptians that he's not a god, and to show the Hebrews that he's not a god, right? To show the Hebrews that he's not a god, right? Because when God gives them the commandment to slaughter the Paschal lamb, right? And the ram is a divinity for the Egyptians, right? So we say, yeah, great. Okay, great. We'll do that. But why don't we go out into the desert and slaughter the lamb there? Right? Because they say specifically, right? How are we going to slaughter this animal that the Egyptians believe to be divine, and they're not going to kill us, right? So, right. So the Hebrews also are like, oh, maybe Pharaoh really is divine, right? So it is precisely to prove that Pharaoh is not a divinity, and there's nothing to be afraid of, right? So, all right. So Alan, okay. So you've already given us a reason why these Psalms, perhaps why these Psalms don't appear in the liturgy. And I think you may be right. I mean, you know, um, the sages sometimes explain why they did something. They don't often explain why they didn't do something. Right. So, I'm not aware, and again, I don't know the whole corpus by any stretch of the imagination, right? But I'm not aware of any place where the sages wrote, well, we left these psalms out of the Siddur because, right? But yeah, maybe they just thought like this is not really something that we should be praying. Okay. But
Rabbi, some years ago, some time ago, and I don't remember the name of the book, and I didn't read the book, but I read a review of a book, probably in the New Yorker, and it was taken from the perspective, the real perspective of a guy like David, who had been a shepherd, and it's none of the glory that we see on television or in the movies. He's a shepherd out there with sheep and all the problems that go with that. And
The
of course,
weather.
from a military standpoint, when he goes to face Goliath, it's not even close to fair because he's got technology on his side. He's got he's definitely going to win because Goliath wouldn't get close enough to him. Can't compete in that arena. So he kills Goliath, but he's still, for all the rest, he's still a shepherd. He didn't go to a land grant college. He didn't spend some time in doing educated things. And this, assuming that he wrote this, it's the whiny complaint of somebody who is fairly unsophisticated and vengeful. And I think that needs to be kept in perspective.
yeah, I mean, look, I mean, the review, it might have been, Rabbi David Wolpe had a biography of David that was part of the Yale Jewish Lives series a few years ago, and is probably a review of that you read. And you're right. I mean, we have this sort of romantic idea of shepherds as like, these sort of gentle, idyllic people because sheep are so cute. You're right. And they're out there and they're playing their little pipe. And it's no, I mean, shepherds were tough guys, right? Shepherds were tough. And if you look at David, like before he became king, right? And he killed a lion and he killed bears and right? You're like, you're a tough guy. I mean, it's not only like nasty hard work, but it's nasty hard work that like you got to be a killer to be a shepherd. Because you've got like not only human predators who want your sheep, but animal predators who want your sheep too. Right? And when when it says, right, Adonai is my shepherd, right? Yeah. I, you need a tough guy looking out for you, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure that I, I don't necessarily share your evaluation of the author of this psalm as sort of whiny. Um, I guess, I don't know, we bring our life situation to it. And um, I mean, look, I mean, a few years ago, I was accused of something that I actually did, right? And I acknowledged it immediately, right? Just like David did. I mean, I didn't do what David did, um, but look, you also can't be a rabbi for 40 years without like people I'm not saying falsely accusing you of like specific things, but just, the rabbi this, the rabbi that, the rabbi, blah, 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 and I mean, I wonder, frankly, I wonder how your brother Sidney would read this poem this psalm as opposed to you, right? Because again, I'm sure, he, over the course of his many years of public life, has had all kinds of accusations thrown at him that were probably unfair and unfounded, right? So he might read this psalm very differently than you do. We bring our lot, right? We read these psalms in light of our own life experience, I think, right? And I mean, yeah, I see, again, whether it's David or somebody else, um, he's pissed off, certainly, but I don't think he's necessarily whiny. I think he certainly feels that the accusations are false and unfair. Factually, where they are, no way of knowing, because we don't know, like, who's making the accusations, what they are, but I don't know. I don't read it the same way that you do. And I'd be interested. Get Sidney to look at this and see how he reads it. But I don't know. Having said, I mean, what? All right, so Alan, like I said, has given us, I think, a plausible reason why they're not in the liturgy. Anybody a different explanation, or agree with Alan, or maybe disagree with Alan? I mean, why aren't they? Yeah, D.
I don't think it's a matter of agree or disagree with what Alan has said or what you have said, but looking at it from the standpoint of a teacher, who one of my responsibilities was to teach literature, not only a particular work, but comparative literature. And I did that both at the middle school, high school, and master's college level. And one of the things I learned was from my students, and that was let me divert for a second. I think all of us can either chuckle at this or nod at this. In some cases, in some of our lives, we have said, if I become a parent, I will never do what my parent did to me. Or if I become a teacher, there's no way in hell I am ever going to do to my students what this sucker down the hall did to me. And yet we do, fair or unfair. Having said that, I think there are multiple perspectives. I know nothing about the lives of sages or the levels of intelligence or knowledge about biblical history or reality of the times. But it would seem to me that there's as much subjectivity in, well, let me back up for a minute. Growing up, it's hard, especially as a younger person, even now, to determine in my mind what was God's word, what did God write, what did God say, what has come down to us that God said to Moses, who then said to so and so. It's almost like a game of telephone. And it's kind of selective as to not, it can be a matter of prejudice, it can be a matter of personal experience or lack thereof, or it can just simply be from the time you at the top left corner make your point and get down to the bottom, this is from my screen, right corner with
Right.
Alan. Look at the people in between that had to filter your message, then listen to him and filter his message back. So that's a long-winded way of saying I wonder whether some of what did or didn't get into our prayer books or wherever was a matter of selectivity by the sages who were making those decisions. And
No,
surely,
of course it was.
and
Yeah,
surely they must not all have seen or said the same things. That's my opinion. I don't mean to say
right.
because you have to think that either, but what do you think about that?
No, look, it's clear. It's clearly selective. I mean, it's certainly selective in terms of what makes it into the Siddur, right? I mean, nobody claims that, all right, so unlike, all right, so the traditional or quote unquote orthodox perspective is that the Torah, the Pentateuch, the five books of Moses, was written by God or dictated by God to Moses, and therefore,
That's
and
the
we
literal.
have it precisely in the form at which it was given, and therefore all, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's the Pentateuch, right? That does not apply to the rest of the
Right.
Bible, which is inspired but not authored by God. Okay, and all the more so everything after that, right? I mean, like nobody believes God wrote the Siddur. Nobody believes that, right? I mean, it was clearly written by the sages who were far more holy and far more wise than we could ever be, right? But nevertheless, absolutely, they made choices, right? And some of the choices included like editing biblical material to make it say what they wanted to say rather than what it actually says.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and I mean, so why is this psalm in but not this psalm? No, because that's what God wanted. No, I mean, that's what the sages decided, right? Why? They didn't leave anything that tells us, right? Which, no, is great because it frees us to speculate, at will, and it's unfalsifiable, right? It's absolutely unfalsifiable. Yeah, Leslie.
Well, another way to look at this, it's it sounds to me like it's teaching us that um, we should we should bring our problems or our anger or whatever we are feeling, to God, and we should be honest about that, and we should feel comfortable doing that, and they may even be encouraging us to do that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that that's really an important point, right? Is that and I think certainly in terms of psychology or counseling, right, is to tell people you should not feel anger. I mean, first of all, it's counterproductive, but second of all, it's also wrong. Yes, you should feel anger, right? I mean, it's not wrong to be angry. Okay, the question is not how do I learn not to be angry?
Right.
The
What I do
question
with it.
is how do I learn to handle my anger in appropriate and productive rather than inappropriate and counterproductive ways, right? I mean, and to tell people, no, you should never be angry. No, I mean, look, frankly, I mean, the stuff that is going on in the country today should make us angry, right? And if it doesn't make you angry, either you don't know what's going on or you don't know what the Jewish tradition teaches about fairness and equity, right? So you should be, the question is not, should I be angry? The question is, now that I'm angry, what do I do with that anger? Right? And there are productive ways and there are unproductive ways. There are healthy ways and there are unhealthy ways, right? But absolutely, we are for sure allowed to be angry. And I would say sometimes getting angry is actually like a meritorious thing, right? So I think, Leslie, that's a really important point, right? Is that yeah, David or whoever is really pissed off, right? And frankly, sometimes he handles that anger in a healthy and appropriate way, and sometimes he handles it in an unhealthy and inappropriate way. But the problem is not the anger. The problem is what you do with the anger. So, I think there's probably like not a better point than that for us to wrap up. So thanks. I will see many of you. Well, hopefully I'll see you like over Shabbat, but if not, I'll see, and I know, Leslie, I'll see you over Shabbat. Um, Leslie's doing the Haftarah this Shabbat. So,
Mazel tov.
but yeah, I'll see many of you on Sunday as well. So anyway, good night. Shabbat
Good
Shalom.
Good night. Thank you,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
shalom.